This is a talk about pixels, the small units of digital image that compose images, text, and everything else that we see on our screens. But this talk is also about other kinds of pixels, small actions that shape a bigger picture. My work life is made up of millions of pixels every day. 95% of my work time, my team are reduced to pixels in Zoom meetings, Slack chats, and email. I've been working with distributed engineering organizations for the last 5 years. The product engineering organization that I lead in my current role is made up of 65 people who are distributed across the globe. Many of you may be familiar with distributed systems. I want to talk about the most complex systems that I know, distributed systems of people. All of us teammates distributed across the globe make up a system of humans. We're highly connected, widely distributed. We have different interfaces to communicate, and each component of our system is very unique and full of surprises. I believe that distributed teams are the future of how we work. Remote work has grown 91% over the last 10 years alone. More and more companies are at least starting to embrace a balance between co-located team members in some offices and distributed people elsewhere. And it's the same situation that CircleCI, where I currently work, is in as well. We have offices in several locations in the US, in London, in Tokyo, but the majority of our engineering teams are working from home and are distributed in other places. And building teams is hard, and building distributed teams is even harder. I think the main difference between co-located and distributed teams is that building a distributed team requires us to be so much more intentional. Much less happens organically through osmosis or at the water cooler. And many challenges that all teams face are exacerbated when we're distributed across locations and time zones. And remote work doesn't work for everyone. Successfully working remotely is a skill, and it takes time and commitment to develop that skill. Now, can you please raise your hand if you've ever worked remotely before? I'm going to try and see something. It's probably 50% of the room. And can you raise your hand again if you currently work remotely? It's slightly, or by far less people actually, probably 20% or so. Thank you. I'm glad you all are here anyway. The way that I view teams is that each of us as individuals are one pixel-sized part of a team. And each of us play a role in building our team. And this is why this talk is for you, no matter what your role is, and no matter if your closest teammate sits across the desk or on the next continent. You play an important part in making and building your team through small actions and even as tiny as pixels. Building any team is fundamentally about inclusion. It's about making sure that everyone has equal opportunities to contribute and is able to do their best work. Research shows that there are 5 key factors which make teams high-performing. The first one is psychological safety, which means that we feel free to express our work-relevant thoughts and feelings to our teammates. And we believe that they won't think less of us if we ask for help or we make a well-intentioned mistake. In psychologically safe teams, we're able to learn and solve challenging problems together. Amy Edmondson, a Harvard Business School professor who coined the term psychological safety, describes psychological safety in the workplace as a culture where people are not full of fear and not trying to cover their tracks to avoid being embarrassed or punished. In other words, the act of speaking up and learning from mistakes is encouraged and celebrated on psychologically safe teams. Teams also need dependability to be high-performing. Dependability means that all of us teammates reliably complete quality work and on time. We also need structure and clarity, everyone on our team knowing what goals look like, what expectations are, and everyone being accountable. Then there is meaning. All of us need to find a purpose in our work we do and the output. And lastly, impact, the feeling that our work has an impact. Today, I want to focus on how we can foster those in our teams, and we'll explore small actions that we can take in the areas of connection, collaboration, and communication, and how each of us can do our part in building a high-performing team. And I want to start by looking at how we hone connection. As humans, all of us strive to be connected to a larger purpose, but we also want to feel connected with other people around us. When we're in the same location as our teammates, we pick up very small signals about them, like their body language when they're walking into the office in the morning. Or we know how much coffee they're having today, and maybe they're a bit tired. Or we also see if they're tense or they're relaxed. All these small signals get completely lost remotely. And small things like differences in energy level have much larger impact instead. When my colleagues in San Francisco get on in the morning, they're high energy and they're excited to start their day. But it's already 5 or 6 p.m. for me, and I'm kind of tired and probably have a hard time concentrating, especially in winter right now. So let's look at how we can build connection in our teammates despite those kinds of challenges. And the basis of all connection is trust. Trusting our teammates means we're able to rely on each other. We know that we care about each other. But trust also means that we're able to own the mistakes that we make. And we earn trust not through grand gestures, but through small pixel-sized actions and moments. And many of the actions I'll talk about over the course of this talk are specifically designed to help us build trust in our teams. Trust can start when we look beyond the pixels that we see on our screens and we focus on each other's humanness. When I joined CircleCI last year, I met with everyone in our engineering organization to get to know the people in our teams. During one of those conversations, one of our engineers said to me, "I need to meet my team in person every once in a while to remind myself that they're actual people." This sentiment struck a chord with me, and I've been thinking about it since. When we largely interact with two-dimensional piles of pixels or icons on a screen, it's just so easy to forget that we're interacting with actual humans. When we center each other's humanness, we go beyond knowing what domain expertise our teammates have or what they got done last week. We get interested and curious in who they are as people and what drives, motivates, and frustrates them. And we can again connect through very small actions on a human basis. If you can, add a photo of yourself to your company's Slack channel or other chat tool that you're using. It helps people see you as a person and connect a little bit better than with just a generic avatar. When you meet people, greet them with the appropriate greeting for their time zone. Even when it's 6 p.m. for me, all of my meetings start with me saying good morning to the other people I'm talking to, because so many of my teammates are located on the West Coast in the US. But over time, I've memorized my teammates' locations, and I'll try to adapt to whoever's joining our meetings. And I genuinely appreciate when people say good evening to me, even though it's their morning, because it makes me feel like they're mindful of where I'm at in my life right now. Recently, when a new team was formed in our department, they created a document in which everyone on the team answered a few questions to introduce themselves to the others, sharing things like how they got into tech, their career so far, their hobbies, pets, and what they care about in their lives. I also think that special interest channels in company chats are really important. Every one of you may have heard of the infamous random channel, or you have a dogs, cats, or bike channel. That's just at least a few of those that we have. And these channels allow us to see each other as humans, and they help us connect at an interpersonal level, especially when that's nothing that we can do just easily at the water cooler or in the office hallway. And honestly, it's also just pretty cool to know that one of my teammates made another successful sourdough bread on the weekend. Someone else built a Lego fort with their kids, and another one assembled a new keyboard. I also try to be really mindful of special events in my teammates' lives, like knowing which holidays, anniversaries, or birthdays they care about and reaching out to them on those days. But being human also means that all of us have different values and expectations, especially around how we collaborate, communicate, and what matters to us in terms of how recognition or feedback. These values are often really implicit, and we can connect as a team by surfacing them and talking about what we expect from each other and defining standards for those. One of our teams have defined communication guidelines, including a commitment to over-communication, and they review frequently how they're doing on those expectations in practice. Expectations can also include what channels we use for which purpose. For example, keeping casual chat in Slack, but disseminating more important information through email or other shared documents. In this blog post that I shared here, one of our engineering managers wrote about how they set communication expectations on their team and how they're working to live up to those. Setting expectations is really important, in particular for how we make decisions. Making decisions effectively and quickly as a team can be really tricky when we're distributed around the globe. So define with your team how you make decisions and how they get communicated to everyone to make sure that everyone on the team can feel included. We've been using decision records in our organization since last year, mostly for technical decisions, but we've designed them in a way that they're also usable for other kinds of decisions. These get raised as proposals as first, and then disseminated via different communication channels once they've been decided. If you're looking to learn more about architectural decision records, the adr.github.io site is a really good collection of resources around it. Another part of connection is lifting each other up. Learning together and from each other is one of the best things we can do to grow together and grow as a team. Some teams I work with have found it really useful to set up mentoring pairs across their team or with other teams as well. But learning can also mean that we're being proactive in offering learning opportunities to our teammates. One of our engineers who has really deep knowledge of a specific service in our system reached out to other team members a couple of weeks ago and offered them to do pair programming on that service together to help them learn its intricacies better. I think giving praise is another really beautiful way to connect. In our company Slack, we have a channel called Gratitude, which people use to express their appreciation for others who've helped them. I love this channel a lot because it shines a light on the small and larger acts of kindness and support which connect all of us as an organization. I also think an even better way, though, to connect as a team is through feedback, especially constructive criticism. But in many of the distributed teams that I've worked with, I've seen that this can become really, really hard. When we mostly see each other on screens, it can feel like we have such precious time together that it can become really difficult to have harder but important conversations. But I believe that feedback is a muscle that we can train. It helps when we make a habit of sharing small nuggets of feedback very frequently, and also build a habit of proactively seeking feedback from others. This way, we learn to give feedback more effectively, especially when it's only small things in the first place, and we build a stronger feedback culture on our team. I also found a good starting point for improving feedback on teams can be a conversation about where all of us want to grow. I'm currently trying out this framework here with one team and using those questions to discuss feedback together. This template you see on this slide is from the book Feedback and Other Dirty Words by M. Tamara Chandler, and it offers useful frameworks to help teams get to a better feedback culture. What we did was we wrote those questions down in a shared document, and each of us added answers to how we prefer receiving feedback, what we care about the most, and what we're currently working on. We then had a discussion about it as a team. And now we can use what we learned about each other's feedback preferences to give each other much more meaningful and specific feedback on a day-to-day basis. Another feedback model I like using is framing feedback around observations, behaviors, and impact, and adding a question or request to those. I'll give you an example of an interaction I had with a teammate a few months ago. So this teammate had put up a pull request, and I'd given them feedback to it, but they ended up merging it without addressing any of my comments. I got frustrated about it and used this model for framing my feedback, saying, I saw you merge this pull request without responding to my comments. It's the observation part. Then the impact part. This made me feel like you didn't take my feedback into account and my thoughts didn't matter. And then the question or request, can you help me understand what happened there? Now the thing is, when we genuinely get curious about the answer to the question that we're asking as part of our feedback, we're opening up space to connect as humans. And in this specific case, it led to my teammate and I having a really good conversation about how we can collaborate together much more effectively. Connection is also about staying connected with the goals that we're looking to achieve. When we're working through a seemingly never-ending stream of tickets or we're trying to solve deeply technical problems, it's really easy to lose track of the bigger picture. I think there's a lot of power in the question, what problem are we trying to solve? And if you're looking for anything to remember from this talk, just make it to ask this question more frequently. It's a tiny question of just 7 words, I think. I'm going to recount later. And this question helps us look beyond the task at hand and connect it with the bigger picture. It also helps us focus on the needs of our business, of our users, and the expectations much better. And I've also seen that what problem are we trying to solve can either prevent us from going down rabbit holes or pull us out of a rabbit hole that we got ourselves into. Now, when we talk about connection in distributed teams, I also think it's important we think about what we do when it's lacking. Many remote workers struggle with isolation, and a part of this is that the way we handle emotions in distributed teams is very different. When we largely interact with others asynchronously, it means that we have a lot of space for developing our own thoughts. We can easily get in our own head and don't have a lot of space for clarifications. It's natural to wonder, what does my team think of the work I did last week? Or why has my colleague not responded to my message even though they've been online for hours? I've been dealing with remote loneliness too, and I've seen a lot of people struggle with it. And there are a few things that I want to talk about that I've found helpful. And the first thing is to talk about it. I'd always recommend bringing it up with a manager or a person on your team that you trust, because many of us deal with it themselves, and even just sharing how we're doing and having a conversation about it can really help us feel less alone. I also found it helpful to structure my workday. As a manager, my workday is relatively naturally structured through a lot of meetings, but I still have a lunch break set and use that time every day to go for a walk and visit the same coffee place and have a chat with the owner. You can also add variety by going to the gym or doing other physical activities you enjoy, or work from a co-working space one day a week. I also try to make a habit of meeting people offline. I have a few coworkers in town, and we'll sometimes meet for a coffee or to have a meeting in person. We also do one-on-ones remotely through a structured schedule. You may have heard of the app Donut, which sets up teammates as pairs to have casual chats. I've also recommended to other teammates to just put a regular time on the calendar, even if it's only a monthly event. Another important part of remote loneliness can also be the feeling of missing out. When you feel like you're missing out on important discussions or decisions being made, that's not necessarily always true, but I also think it's really important to address that part specifically. So raise that issue, check with your manager how you can get more frequent updates and how you can stay more connected to what's going on in your organization. So we've just explored how we can hone connection in our teams. When we make space for each other's humanness, when we surface what we expect from each other, and when we help each other grow, we can build trust as teams and build a stronger connection. And this connection sets the basis for our collaboration. Collaboration is about building things together, but we can shape this collaboration in large parts by starting with ourselves first and with our own mindset. I think a lot about power dynamics in teams and organizations. The power that we have and its impact are really easy to underestimate, but they're very real. And power is a force that shapes so many of our interactions with our teammates. Many of us hold explicit or implicit power, for example, through our roles, through our domain expertise, seniority, or tenure. But all of us also carry biases and we have blind spots. Our perspectives aren't universal. Mine specifically is shaped by my role, but also the privileges I have as a white woman in the tech industry. We can set ourselves up for much better collaboration when we approach it with humbleness and with awareness of our own limitations. When we're in meetings, when we have discussions in chat, or when we review someone else's work, it also helps when we frequently ask ourselves, how much space am I taking up right now? We can also open up more space for others by inviting them into conversations. For example, by saying, what do you think? I'd like to hear your thoughts. This mindset of humbleness also helps us build better relationships. Collaboration isn't just about our output as a team. When we collaborate intentionally every day, it will also strengthen our relationships and trust as a team, which will help us become much more resilient and effective. Our engineering teams use pair programming on a day-to-day basis. It helps us get higher quality results and also distribute knowledge. In the context of collaboration, I also want to talk a bit about hero culture. Hero culture, which many of you may have heard of, it describes a culture where organizations reward very talented people who frequently go the extra mile to get seemingly impossible tasks done just by themselves, and often under a lot of pressure. Many companies reward this kind of heroism through promotions or increasing influence, visibility, or compensation increases. Hero culture is unfortunately still very common in our industry, and I've seen it have disastrous effects in organizations. Hero culture weakens teams, and it sets up the hero for failure by putting a lot of pressure on them and putting them into a self-perpetuating downward spiral of being increasingly the only person who can solve challenging problems. Hero culture is the result of organizational failure, and it's very hard to combat. It's a structural issue, and no individual engineer should be tasked with fixing it by themselves. But if you feel like you have to be that hero on your team, or you have such a hero on your team, I think it's really important to have a conversation about that, either with your teammates or your manager, ideally all of them. And also work together to build approaches on how to tackle this culture and get to a more collaborative culture on your team. Collaboration is also about learning together. The way that we talk about failure on our teams in particular has really large impact on whether everyone on our team feels safe. High-performing teams focus on collaboration and identifying problems and solutions together instead of assigning blame or pointing fingers. This is also why it's so important to keep postmortems blameless and to hold regular retrospectives to discuss how we're working together. Part of learning is also being open about what we don't know. One of the engineers I currently work with does this really well. They're a really experienced engineer with deep knowledge, and they will frequently ask questions in public channels, like saying, "I don't know how this works, can someone help me with this?" They also make a habit of sharing what they learned, like writing up documents and sharing them with the team. And this way, they're using their own power and privileges to create space for others to learn. Learning also means embracing change together. Change can be really difficult to deal with for all of us. And predictability in itself is a human core need, and some of us need certainty a bit more than others. Learning to deal with change for myself was something that I really struggled with for a while and had to work on very hard. In the past, when I would discuss with my teams topics like a change in our delivery practices, I tried to think through everything up front and identify any possible issue. Wanting to get things really right led me to being overcautious and delay changes, and I'd still sometimes overlook things. What I like doing with my teams now is, instead of defining changes as everlasting, we just say, let's make this an experiment. Let's try it out for 4 weeks, then hold a retrospective about it. And this small change in mindset has been really impactful for us. It helps us embrace learning and changes, try out new things more easily, and at the same time, we continuously iterate and check in with each other to see how we're doing with it. We just explored how a mindset of humbleness can help us make space for others, and how we can learn together through intentional collaboration and openness to change. One more important topic that I don't want to neglect when talking about team building is communication. Communication is at the core of our work every day. And with the time zone distribution of my teams, every tiny bit of communication matters. When something's left unsaid or unclear, we easily lose 24 hours just between going back and forth over a single question. We also have way fewer opportunities to interact with each other, and so all our words matter a lot. Our communication modes are shifted to co-located teams. Studies done in the 1960s showed that roughly 55% of communication is just body language, 38% is tone of voice, and only 7% are the actual words spoken. When we're interacting as members of distributed teams, we largely lack all of those, and our communication gets reduced, limiting the richness of our interactions with our teammates. This is why good and well-timed communication is so vital for distributed teams, and it again starts with ourselves and learning to listen well. That means, for example, being curious. We need to recognize that others bring context, expertise, and perspectives that we don't have, and get curious to learn from them. It also means listening to learn and not just to respond. Listening with real intent means quieting our own internal agenda and not already planning our next contribution to the discussion. It also means creating a shared understanding. We can drive towards that by using active listening techniques. So for example, when we've listened to someone, using phrases like, "So you're saying that?" or "I understand that," and then repeating the gist of what we heard back to the other person to check with them if our understanding is correct. I also recommend getting curious and asking good questions. Always ask questions early, especially if you're blocked or you struggle with a problem by yourself. Asking detailed questions and indicating what kind of answers we're looking for is a really helpful technique with that. Sharing, like, do I need just someone to listen or someone I can vent to? Do I need feedback, an idea? Do I need instructions? Or what am I expecting from the other person? We can also use follow-up questions. I like those specifically a lot. These are a great way to learn more, and they have special power because they help us dig deeper. They also signal that we're listening, that we care, and that we want to know more. For example, what makes you say that? Or why do you think this approach is going to be a good one? Or is there anything else that's important? These kind of questions help us understand the other person better and again drive towards a shared understanding. I also think there's a lot of power in silence. And it's about giving the other person space to answer. But silence can easily feel like a void that needs to be filled. And honestly, having sat in group meetings with 30 people, silence can become really awkward very quickly. But give people space to think and process and give them space to answer, and in the meantime, just enjoy the silence. I also want to talk about timing a bit. Timing is key in our communication, and when in doubt, I always recommend trying to avoid surprises as much as possible. There's a really famous Bill Gates quote that goes along the lines of, "Bad news should travel faster than good news." Now, I think that's a really good rule of thumb to remember, especially because bad or complicated news can be really difficult to share. And we may struggle finding the right words. But it's so much easier for all of us to deal with bad news than we deal with uncertainty or even gossip. Communication also increasingly means written communication. Even co-located teams rely a lot on chat or writing in documents, feedback and pull requests, and other means of writing. And if there's one thing that you take away from this talk, make it learn to write better. It will change the way you interact with the people in your lives forever. For starters, I always recommend being crisp. Limit your sentences to around 15 to 20 words. That's around one line in many document editors or chat tools. Always lead with your request or question and set expectations of what type of response you're expecting. Are you looking for comments, answers to a specific question, a thumbs up, thumbs down, or something else? But writing well is also about being inclusive. A while back, I wrote an email to my team and said, "Let's table this question." A few very confused messages from my team later, I learned that to table something means postponing it in American English. In British English, it means let's discuss it now. I can tell you, avoiding idioms or cultural references is always a great idea. And also avoid jargon at all costs. Jargon is really common in our industry. But when we use jargon, it does a disservice not just to our audience, but also to ourselves. When we use common terminology to explain what's on our minds, it also helps us solidify these ideas for ourselves and also helps others understand us better. But jargon and internal memes are often a really important part of company cultures, and culture to be shaped in distributed teams can be really tricky. At our company, we have a document that just explains all acronyms that we use, internal memes and jokes, special Slack emoji, and everything else that we're using that's very specific to our company. This file is also linked in our onboarding documents and is shared with new people joining us to help them feel a bit more included and make it a bit more approachable how we interact with each other. I also always call out, add emotion to your words. I'm not going to do the pun of putting the emote in remote, but here we are. Many of us sound much harsher or more curt in written language than we intend to. and conveying emotion with words can be really difficult sometimes. So add some emoji for emotional context, if you can. Writing, though, is only 10% of the work. Anyone can write a lot of words, but I think the hard part is in the editing. I edit any message before I hit the send button, and there are 3 specific things I check. The first one is my message clear? Then there's the second, my expectation. Am I clear with what I expect, by when, and from whom? And there's the third question, which I like calling the anticipation, but it's basically more my educated guess. It's basically, what could the recipient of my message be asking me in response, which I can already answer now? Especially in distributed teams, this is an empathy building exercise. It helps us think through the other person, our relationship with them, and what questions they may have. It can also easily help us reduce turnaround time for emails and avoid questions, but also strengthen our relationships with the person that we're writing to. Writing well in editing also really helps us get better at documentation. There's a lot of very similar words here. Documentation, I think, is a continuous investment in our future team. Working remotely involves a lot of writing and reading, like writing our own thoughts down, giving context and explanations, but also reviewing other people's writing. We also give a lot of feedback on others' thoughts and proposals every day. And we can make a really big difference when we are really deliberate about documenting what we know, how we got there, where we're at, and what we intend to do next. We can also encourage our teammates to do the same. I put a lot of work into maintaining our internal documentation. And whenever a teammate has an idea or learning that they should be adding to it, I like encouraging my teammates to do the same. So good, well-timed communication is about listening, asking good questions, being inclusive, avoiding surprises, and documenting what we know. It helps make our teams much more resilient. Now that we've looked at connection, collaboration, and communication in our teams, there is one last C that I want to add, and it's continuity. Building great teams is hard, and it's a lot of work. But many of the tools that I shared with you today, I learned the hard way, through mistakes I made and challenges I went through with my teams. And building teams is never done. All of us constantly grow, evolve, and the organizations that we're in grow and evolve as well. Systems of humans are ever evolving and full of surprises, which is one of the main reasons why I love working with people so much. Building our teams is something continuous that we need to do every single day. We need to continuously learn and grow together. So no matter where you are on your team, and no matter if your closest teammate sits across the table or across an ocean from you, focus on strong connection, intentional collaboration, and conscious communication. And continue building your team every single day, at one small action and one pixel at a time. Thank you.